What may have started as a routine flight soon became a journey marked by tragedy. Passengers boarded with the expectation of reaching their destination safely, unaware that the events of that day would soon be remembered as one of aviation's darkest chapters. Today, let's unravel the mystery of Air India Flight 101. On the morning of January 24, 1966, Air India Flight 101 prepared for what should have been a routine journey across continents. The aircraft, a Boeing 707 named Kanchenjunga, was scheduled to fly from Bombay, today's Mumbai, to London with stops in Delhi, Beirut, and Geneva. At the controls was Captain Joe T. D'Souza, an experienced pilot with thousands of flying hours. Alongside him was a skilled crew, trusted by passengers who were beginning the day, unaware that within hours they would become part of one of aviation's most haunting tragedies. The passengers were a mix of Indian and international travelers, including diplomats, tourists, business people, and students. Among them was a man whose presence would make the crash infamous far beyond aviation circles, Dr. Homi Jahangir Bhabha. Known as the father of India's nuclear program, Bhabha was a brilliant scientist and visionary who had been instrumental in shaping India's atomic energy projects. He was on his way to Vienna to attend a meeting at the International Atomic Energy Agency. His seat aboard Flight 101 would make the disaster a subject of speculation and suspicion for decades to come. The Boeing 707 itself was a modern jetliner for the era. Registered VTDJK, it had been in service since the early 1960s and carried the proud name Kanchenjunga, after the world's third highest mountain. Air India had named its aircraft after Himalayan peaks, a tradition that reflected both pride and ambition. This aircraft had already flown countless long-haul routes. The 707 was seen as reliable and capable of handling the demanding journey across Europe and into Geneva's mountainous surroundings. As Flight 101 left Bombay and stopped in Delhi, then Beirut, everything was routine. Radio exchanges were standard, weather checks were made, and the crew managed fuel and altitude as planned. The final leg before London was Geneva. This approach required careful navigation because Geneva is surrounded by the Alps, and Mont Blanc, the highest mountain in Western Europe, rises just northeast of the airport. Pilots had to be precise about their position before beginning descent because the difference between safety and disaster was measured in minutes of flight time and a few thousand feet of altitude. By the time the aircraft neared Geneva, weather was cold, with some cloud cover obscuring mountain peaks. It was around 8 a.m., local time, when Flight 101 contacted Geneva Air Traffic Control. The controller instructed the crew to descend once they had passed Mont Blanc, the massive ridge between their position and Geneva. The problem was that the crew believed they had already cleared Mont Blanc, when in reality, they were still above its slopes. At 8:02, tragedy struck. The Kanchenjunga slammed into Mont Blanc's Rocher de la Tournette Ridge at about 15,400 feet. The aircraft disintegrated on impact. All 117 people on board, 106 passengers, and 11 crew members were killed instantly. The news spread quickly. In India, shock turned to mourning as word arrived that Dr. Homi Bhabha had been among the victims. For Air India, it was a devastating blow, coming barely 16 years after another of its aircraft, the Malabar Princess, had also crashed into Mont Blanc in 1950. The eerie similarity stunned observers. 2 Air India flights, 2 different Boeing aircraft, and the same mountain. Recovery teams faced enormous challenges. The wreckage was scattered across a steep, icy slope covered in snow. Helicopters ferried rescue workers, but there was no hope of survivors. They collected remains, debris, and whatever could be salvaged, but much of the wreck lay embedded in the glacier. In the weeks following, grieving families demanded answers, and investigators set out to determine what had happened in the cockpit of Flight 101. The French Bureau of Inquiry and Analysis for Civil Aviation Safety, known as the BEA, took the lead in investigating the crash. They pieced together radio communications, studied weather conditions, and examined the technical state of the aircraft. One important finding was that one of the aircraft's VOR receivers was not working. These receivers helped pilots fix their exact position by tracking signals from ground-based radio beacons. With one receiver down, the crew had reduced accuracy in pinpointing their location. The investigation found that the crew had misinterpreted their position. Believing they were clear of Mont Blanc, they descended prematurely. When air traffic control told them to continue descent, they acknowledged and complied, unaware that they were still over the massif. By the time they realized, it was already too late. The official conclusion was that a navigational error, compounded by instrument failure and a misunderstanding of ATC instructions, led to controlled flight into terrain, one of aviation's deadliest types of accidents. In the immediate aftermath, the tragedy had far-reaching consequences. Dr. Homi Bhabha's death was a national blow for India. He had been central to India's nuclear energy development, and his sudden loss left a leadership vacuum. Because of his stature, the crash quickly became a target for conspiracy theories. Some speculated that it was not an accident, but sabotage. Rumors spread that foreign intelligence agencies might have orchestrated the crash to halt India's nuclear ambitions. However, investigators found no evidence of explosives or tampering. The wreckage bore the hallmarks of impact at high speed, not sabotage. Still, for many, the coincidence of his presence on board kept the theories alive. The crash also highlighted eerie parallels with Air India Flight 245, the Malabar Princess, which had struck Mont Blanc in November 1950. That earlier disaster killed all 48 on board. Both flights were bound for Geneva, both aircraft collided with the same mountain, and both crashes were attributed to navigational error in treacherous alpine conditions. The strange repetition cemented Mont Blanc's reputation as a dangerous place for aircraft approaches. For decades after 1966, the wreckage of Flight 101 remained frozen inside the Boson Glacier on Mont Blanc. Each summer, as snow melted, small fragments would surface. Local climbers and residents sometimes stumbled upon debris, bits of fuselage, personal belongings, even documents. The mountain seemed to slowly release the aircraft piece by piece. In 2008, climbers found pieces of wreckage at high altitude. In 2012, an extraordinary discovery was made. A mail pouch belonging to Air India, buried for nearly half a century, surfaced from the ice. Inside were letters, official documents, and papers addressed to Indian diplomatic offices. The pouch was returned to Indian authorities, treated as both evidence and a relic of history. Then, in 2013, an even more striking find emerged: a metal box filled with precious stones. Local climbers discovered the container near the glacier, and it contained emeralds, sapphires, and rubies, thought to be worth hundreds of thousands of dollars. Investigators linked it to Flight 101, as the cargo manifest from 1966 listed a shipment of jewelry. The stones were eventually handed over to authorities, but they added yet another layer of fascination to the story. In 2020, more items appeared. Newspapers from January 1966, preserved in ice. These included editions of Indian publications reporting the very news of Bhabha's trip and other contemporary events. The papers, frozen for decades, resurfaced intact, offering a time capsule of the day of the crash. Each new discovery revived interest in Flight 101. Families of victims were reminded of their loss, while aviation historians gained new details to add to the record. Climbers on Mont Blanc continued to encounter fragments, pieces of engines, clothing, and other artifacts. The glacier, moving slowly downhill each year, carried remnants toward the valley, ensuring that the past never stayed fully hidden. The crash also remains significant because of the unanswered questions that persist. Without modern flight recorders, investigators could only reconstruct so much. We know a navigational error occurred, but we do not know every word spoken in the cockpit. We cannot be certain how much confusion existed among the crew about their exact position. Theories continue to circulate, from the mundane to the extraordinary, but the most widely accepted explanation remains human error, compounded by instrument failure. Today, when we look at modern aviation, it is clear that disasters like Flight 101 led to improvements in navigation and safety. Airliners are now equipped with ground proximity warning systems and terrain awareness systems that alert pilots when they are too close to terrain. Communication protocols between pilots and controllers have been tightened to avoid misunderstandings. Aircraft have multiple redundant navigation systems, and failures are flagged immediately. These changes make a repeat of Flight 101 far less likely in the modern era. For India, the crash of Air India Flight 101 will always be tied to the loss of Homi Bhabha. His absence reshaped the trajectory of India's nuclear program, delaying projects and leaving a void in leadership. For aviation historians, the crash remains a textbook case of controlled flight into terrain. For the families of the 117 on board, it is a personal tragedy that time has never erased. From takeoff in Bombay to the moment of impact on Mont Blanc, The story of Air India Flight 101 is one of navigation gone wrong, a mountain claiming yet another aircraft, and a world left wondering what could have been different if just one instrument had worked, or if one message had been understood more clearly. And with each piece of wreckage that emerges from the ice, the mountain reminds us of that cold January morning in 1966, when the sky seemed clear, but the danger lay hidden in the clouds. And that's all about the tragic story of Air India Flight 101. Even after all these years, the questions and the emotions surrounding that day have never fully faded. Do you think this was simply human error, or could there have been more behind the disaster? Share your thoughts in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe, and stay tuned for more stories that uncover the hidden chapters of aviation history.